Good afternoon and welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online. My name is Drew Clark. Today is Wednesday, June 11th, 2025, and it is just one day away from the Speeding Bead Summit, our in-person all-day gathering where we'll be talking about the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or whether if it is renamed, whatever that new name is, but it'd still be BEAD, right? Because people love the BEAD name. And there is, as I'm sure many in this group and of our readers know, there is a revision to the BEAD program that has come down from the Commerce Department Secretary Howard Lutnick and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Doesn't yet have a confirmed administrator, but the guidance came out 5 days ago, last Friday. And so we've all been looking at it, digesting it, and it's going to be very much discussed at this important event. The event is available. Registration is $225. You get breakfast, lunch, and 3 months access, 3 months complimentary access. That's a $297 value to Broadband Breakfast Club, which gives you the premium content, all news on Broadband Breakfast every day. And if you are not in DC or are not able to make it here, we have a remote option. You can sign up for the webinar option and get access to the webinar in real time. And you also get 1 month's access to Broadband Breakfast Club, a $99 value. And so that will enable you to watch all the video recordings that we will make of the event. And again, we don't want to take too much time on it. It's clearly been on our minds because a lot of details have gone into preparing this by our marketing director, Quinn Neem. The Speeding Bead Summit, we will have keynotes from Bob Latta of Ohio, from Aaron Huchin of Indiana, and a video message from Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada. And then we have 4 action-packed panels: how are states thinking about reasonable costs now, finding the state versus federal balance in BEAD, reacting to the new BEAD notice regarding the notice of funds opportunity, and panel 4, an important one, on building, maintaining, and adopting digital workforce skills. We want to give a huge shout out to the sponsors of the Speeding Bead Summit. They include Platinum sponsor Ready, Gold sponsors National Digital Inclusion Alliance and Broadband Nation and Nokia, and Silver sponsors Fiber Broadband Association, Gaia, and NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. Again, just go to broadbandbreakfast.com, look at the top, Speeding Bead Summit, and you can find all the details about the event. And before I open up to our current conversation, I also want to just point out that we've been doing this program, the Speeding Boy, you can see how my mind is focused on that. We've been doing this program, Broadband Breakfast Live Online, for more than 5 years, since the start of the pandemic. And it's a free program. It's available at no charge for people to sign up and watch and interact with as they participate in the varied conversations we have. And we're able to do this because of the support of our Broadband Breakfast sponsors. And one of our Broadband Breakfast sponsors is NextNav. NextNav Inc. is on a mission to solve national security challenges with innovative 3D positioning, navigation, and timing technology. NextNav's resilient solutions provide a vital terrestrial complement and backup to GPS, or global positioning systems, ensuring accuracy and reliability for critical infrastructure and next-gen applications when it matters most. For more info, visit nextnav.com. That's NEXTNAV.com. Nextnav.com. So with that, let's go ahead and open it up to all of our panelists here. I want to make sure that we have made everyone able to turn their cameras on. Sorry about that, but I think you can now. So we're going to talk today about tribal broadband and the state of tribal broadband. When we've got 4 panelists who bring a lot of very different insights and analysis. This is as in the case of most issues we talk about on Broadband Breakfast Live Online, we are not experts. I am not an expert in, but hopefully, those on our panel and you as their audience can bring your insights on this. And we never say, this event is the last word on the subject. We always want to, do another episode, bring more topics to bear on the subject. So let me just turn to the topic we've got in store. It's how tribal broadband has progressed, and we're going to be speaking about how tribal communities have long faced steep barriers to broadband access, from remote geography to historical underinvestment. But recent years have marked or could mark a turning point as both federal and state programs have begun to prioritize tribal connectivity through funding, technical assistance, and collaborative partnerships. Many tribal nations have begun to build and operate networks that reflect their own needs and sovereignty. From successful deployments on tribal lands to capacity building efforts to intergovernmental partnerships, what progress has been made and what remains to be done? So it looks as though I was mistaken here. Do we have everyone, or are we still missing one of our we do. Okay. Wonderful. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to introduce our panelists. So we're going to start off with our first panelist will be Rob Griffin. Rob is the Tribal Broadband Director for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and in that capacity, serving as the Tribal Broadband Director, he leads broadband strategy and infrastructure development to expand digital access across the nation's territory. A proud member of the Choctaw Nation, Rob Griffin brings over 20 years of experience in designing, implementing, and managing technology-driven solutions. So following Rob, we're going to hear from our next speaker will be Isaac, and we're going to hear from Isaac Finner, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at Coos Systems, the company behind BSS OSS platform, Coos Business Engine, automating operations of fiber networks. Isaac is regularly speaking on demand aggregation, open access networks, and automation of network operations, and he has previously worked with business development, sales analysis, and sales management at a number of global companies. We've had Isaac before on several events. Happy to welcome you back to this important discussion with a new lens, right? Because open access networks and tribal. Hey, this is a great combination. Love to hear more about this. Okay, the next speaker will be Mike Edel, who is the Vice President of Network Operations at the Bonfire Infrastructure Group. Mike has become one of the most trusted operational leaders in the industry with 3 decades in telecom. He's led everything from service delivery and customer care to network engineering and field operations, supporting both local providers and some of the nation's largest carriers. And he's worked with Saddleback Communications, IMON, Hawaiian Telecom, and McLeod USA. And then batting cleanup, last but not least, extremely excited to welcome Keith Ponton, who joined, and maybe I got that name wrong, Keith, so forgive me. He joined Arcadis in 2014, and in his role there as the Director of Global Telecoms and Media Cabinet Leader. That's a nice title, Keith. We're excited to hear from you about the role that Arcadis Telecoms and Media Technology practice play since you joined there in April of last year. Keith came to the organization with more than 25 years in telecom and information communications technology across engineering, sales, product management, marketing, and executive level functions. So with that, let's go ahead and turn the screen over to Rob. Take it away.
Halito, good morning, everybody. Rob Griffin here with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. We are located in far southeastern Oklahoma. We are 100 square miles, the third largest tribal nation in the US. And we've been working to build broadband services for the last several years. We found out through our technical feasibility study in 2016 that we had nearly 40% of our tribal nation uncovered by 25/3 FCC standard broadband. And so with that, we started working towards getting grants from USDA as well as other organizations to build out those areas that have no coverage. And when I say no coverage, I literally mean very little coverage, even by satellite. And so over the course of the last several years, we've been able to gain access to funding to build out these areas. And our goal is to reach over 80% of our tribal reservation within the next year or two. And so we've done that by working with many different government agencies. I'm also the Fiber Broadband Association tribal co-chair for our working group. We currently have nearly 50 tribal nations that communicate with each other, and we talk about how we can either sustain our existing internet service providers, of which there's approximately 50, and then also how can we sustain going forward, as well as support any new tribal internet service providers that are out there today. So we know this is a difficult task. There's a lot of complicated issues. The first one being tribal consent. We know that in the past, programs have been put out there. There has been dispute with government agencies, funding agencies, as well as tribal nations and corporate entities trying to build and overbuild into existing areas. And this is a very complicated subject that takes a lot of work from every party. And of course, when you have 50 different states that have received funding and are distributing those funds through different ways, and then now we have this complete change in the way that fiber preference and preference for all technologies is delivered out there, we have an ongoing conversation of how we can do that the most effective way. Now, the stats are very easy to look at. If you live on a tribal reservation, you are only getting access to reliable, affordable connectivity 70% of the time. And so when you look at that and compare it to the rest of the United States and rural areas, you have access only, a limited 7% of the time that's not available. So the comparison is great, and there are lots of challenges that we have to overcome. One of the things that I like to do is work with other tribal nations in their conversation, find out what their challenges are and how they're overcoming them, and then we spread the word throughout other tribal nations across the U.S. So glad to be here, Drew. Thanks for letting me join in.
No, of course. We're extremely grateful to you to taking the time and being part of this discussion. Let's go ahead and turn it over to Isaac. Tell us a little bit about the work that you and partners have been doing in tribal areas.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, also happy to be here. And just a short intro, you already did one, but COS Systems, we're a software company that was based in Sweden, even though USA and Canada is our biggest market nowadays. But coming from Sweden, as I do, and sort of entering the US market, I'm gonna mirror what Rob said when it comes to tribal networks, because I'm not an expert in tribal networks, but it was very obvious that they are very much left behind when it comes to digital infrastructure and I think even other infrastructure often. And there are certain challenges, and I would almost compare it to the more rural parts of where I come from in Sweden, that you often has, a vast areas, pretty small population, and often it's hard to find people also with a lot of telecom background, or maybe not that many. So the sort of the solution in Sweden was open access networks, where you have a separation between the infrastructure, the operations, and the service providers. And I think that might be a topic that comes back on this panel, because we're starting to see this happening in the US and Canada in the tribal networks. Because I think it's really key, especially with grant funding, that the ownership of the infrastructure stays with the tribes. I mean, like Rob said, providers have not served everyone, and historically, and probably for commercial reasons, right? It doesn't make it isn't profitable enough, and they don't do it. But if you build it and own the infrastructure, you control it, right? And that is key, I think. But in like Rob said, many has gone down the route and became their own ISPs, and they're basically doing everything it entails to be an internet provider. I see a future where some, maybe it's the smaller ones, I don't know, keep in control of the infrastructure, but open it up as an open access network where you could have another party come in and do the operations for you. You could invite other ISPs to provide services, and by doing this, you remain in control, but you could sort of ease into the other roles if you would like to. So if you start to build more competency internally and you feel that it's the right thing to operate a network, you could. But if you have worked with an experienced operator and experienced ISPs before, you can probably launch faster and with more of a guaranteed success. So we see this happening. Mike is on; he can speak to it a little bit, and I think that is a very exciting thing. And I haven't really thought about this before. So it was when Rob introduced himself that imagine if you have open access networks in different tribes, and you have these tribal ISPs, they could actually sell on the other tribes. And I think that would be really cool, that go from being a local ISP to actually sell in other tribal networks. That would be completely feasible in an open access scenario if we would see more open access tribal networks. So that was by far much more than I was planning to say on this short intro
no,
to who I am, but I was excited.
Still within the time limit. Thank you. And a very interesting thought, right? I mean, I'd love to get into that. So let's turn it over to Mike to tell us a little bit about the role that Bonfire has played in tribal projects.
Thanks, Drew. Bonfire is our vision is really to support and help municipalities in Indian country get affordable internet access to their environments. I want to go back to the mid 2000s. I worked for a company called McLeod USA, and the owner and founder of that, Clark McLeod, after he left the company, he went around Iowa to sell the idea of municipalities and Native American nations to go out and build networks and then charge service providers to use their infrastructure. And he went around Iowa. This is in the middle 2000s and stuff. And now let's fast forward to 2025. What's interesting is open access network is exactly what he was talking about then. And for us, we have a contract with the Southern Ute Indian tribe in Ignacio, Colorado, where we actually help them get funding. Then they ask us to build the network. We build the middle mile, and we have just completed and finishing up on the fiber to the home environment. And then they ask us to operate it. And what's important about that is it's one thing to have a network, but if you don't have the resources to actually operate it, it doesn't become a resource that you can use. But the Southern Ute Indian tribe thought through that process, and they looked at their IT department and said they don't have the resources to actually operate that. So they got Bonfire for us to do that. And my role is really putting standard operating procedures. We became SOC 2 compliant for the tribe, and making sure that the ISPs, again, this is an open access network. And what we tell the customers that hook up, because their first interface in that community is with Bonfire. And because we have to actually run the drop to their house, the fiber drop to the house. And what we tell them about open access network is in the old days, you'd have a ILEC, an incumbent local exchange carrier, a CLEC, a competitive local exchange carrier, building a coaxial provider, building assets to your house, digging up your yard to put this down because it was a vertical network just for that carrier. In an open access network, it's one network, and that's owned in this case by the Southern Ute Indian tribe. And on that, we can have X number of internet service providers on there. Currently, we have two internet service providers on, which gives the consumer access to different providers who provide different pricing, who can provide different features and functions. And so, if an outage happens and somebody isn't happy with that ISP, they just go online through our cost systems and they put in a cancellation order and it comes through. And then the new ISP gets an order in, they go into the cost system, Isaac system, they put it in there and it automatically provisions that ONT and turns them up on the new system. Billing starts and everything like that. So that's a great opportunity on an open access network, and Southern Ute is doing that. And when we get into other discussion, I'll talk a little bit more about my time with the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community out of Scottsdale, Arizona. Back to you, Drew.
Excellent. Let me go ahead and widen the view. And thanks for drilling in a little more details there, Mike. Let's turn it over to Keith for our closing thoughts before we open up to our discussion. And again, we really want to hear from all of you in our audience. Thanks for being here, as you are every Wednesday. Let's dive into this, and feel free to put your questions in the Q&A tab so that we can, others can upvote them and talk and build on top of them. So Keith, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Drew. And I'm also very excited to be with you today. I'm actually coming to you. I do have a global responsibility. My citizenship is Canadian, and I'm coming to you from a First Nations community today, actually just north of the border in Ontario. So we have a lot of experience both within Canada and the U.S. markets as Arcadis, supporting First Nations and tribal communities as they look to build out and improve infrastructure. And certainly broadband, as we all know, is very much a key infrastructure, a fourth utility, if you like. And certainly there's the technology that's important in terms of deployment. I know we're all very, I'll say fiber first focused, but realize some of the cost constraints of building in very difficult terrain. But what I spend my time talking to tribal leadership about is really long-term operating strategies and the reason why. And when I say the reason why is not only basic internet services are important for citizens of these communities to join and interact with society, but it's really an economic development path forward. It's an economic development path that enables local remote jobs, digital jobs, typically higher paying jobs than what people might experience without internet. It's a business attraction and retention tool to attract commerce, tribal-owned businesses that start to flourish in the digital domain. So as we approach these projects, certainly technology selection and structuring the project is important. Keeping operating costs down and becoming a very efficient network operator is important. And certainly we've seen communities globally adopt the open access business model and a very efficient OSS, BSS software, COS systems to enable operations with a very low human touch perspective. So it dramatically improves the business model. It allows local champions to emerge, local training and knowledge transfer to occur not only during construction, but during operations, and provides that sense of sovereignty that's so important for the communities. Sovereignty is a fancy word, but plain spoken, it's keeping money and decisions local. And that's important in terms of pure network operations, but also what you do with the network. It's a chance to, I'll say, create and maintain data sovereignty, language sovereignty, allowing traditional languages to flourish, and to respect some of the local traditions in terms of knowledge transfer and storytelling from elders to newer generations that sometimes gets lost with a lot of the oral history that is tradition in many tribes. So as Arcadis, we feel that we play an enabling role. We understand that projects need to come with I'll say a community first perspective and move at the pace that the community is ready for and deal with local issues, land rights, traditional grounds, and that might be disturbed through a construction process, but also in a way that the network is operated and supported locally. So I'm really excited to get into the discussion, and Drew, I'll turn it back to you.
Excellent. Well, let's dive on in. Once again, invite our audience to put in questions and we've got our first one. So Dan Smith, thank you. Dan, you're great. You're always got lots of questions, and we know you're tuned in from Hawaii. So his question is, what's the range of operating costs with the fiber infrastructure paid by grants? So let's assume that's talking about the project that Isaac and Mike are involved in. Do you want to tackle that?
Well, the grants that I'm aware of for the Southern Ute are around $40-some million all in. And then they have their contribution on top of that. And like I said, we're near the end of that project. We're just building the actual drops now to the homes, but that's kind of a ballpark. That's about 4,000 households and coverage. And I don't know the area of the whole reservation. Interesting thing about the Southern Ute, I've never heard this when I worked at the Salt River Indian Reservation. That's one contiguous reservation that only tribal members can own anything on there, including tribal government. This is a checkerboard reservation, meaning that there are non-tribal members that own land within the reservation boundaries. When Southern Ute went out to get funding for this, they included everybody. They went to serve the whole reservation, irregardless whether they're tribal members or not. Now the priority is on tribal members, but hopefully that helps Dan out on kind of an estimate on that.
Well, I'm not sure if you were kind of preemptively responding to this question that we just got from an anonymous attendee. How does the ownership title work for broadband assets funded and deployed by non-tribal entities on sovereign tribal lands? Mike, and I'd love Keith's top answer as well.
Yeah, all the assets are tribal assets. We were just the builders of those assets. All title belongs to the tribe.
Mm-hmm. Keith and Rob, yeah, more general. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean,
please.
I'll chime in on that as well. I mean, certainly, I'll say the general principle, regardless of who pays, once the facilities are, I'll use the word attached to the land underground or attached to pole structures, the ownership and direction for all practical purposes rests with the tribe or the nation in Canada. And certainly there's I'll say practical gray areas there on legacy assets where other carriers may feel they have ownership rights, but I think we're starting to see more and more that judicial decisions are weighing in strongly on the side of tribal ownership, not only assets, but I know there's a larger discussion going on right now on spectrum rights. So not only owning the infrastructure on the ground, but effectively the natural resource in the air, that control and sovereignty over spectrum on tribal lands.
Yeah,
And for
just to
us,
add to that, maybe to back up to the application process, every agency has a different application process. And, most tribal nations either will have to outsource or hire somebody as a grant writer to come into their organization to be able to build a very solid application. And, one of the things that we've put out there for comment is that all the government organizations, if there could be some type of synchronicity in terms of building an application, because when we look at the different ones, they all have very similar characteristics. And the first part is that you will receive the asset. You will likely have to get reimbursed for that asset. The asset becomes yours once you finish the build out, and then you've gone through all the processes of showing that it's complete. And then throughout there, you'll have an auditing during the process, after the process, and you'll be able to work with that to make sure that you manage the asset correctly. So, once you have the asset in place, then how do you turn that into maintenance type revenue? And that's one of the things that I think is important, that when you build these networks, because they are in rural lands, that the pro formas are very narrow, which means that they're typically going to break even at best in most cases. So this is where tribal nations can start to become very unique. They can start to look at how we can apply applications on top of these, either fiber networks or fiber to fixed wireless networks that are unique. And in tribal world, we have many stories that are unique for us, because with lack of access to healthcare, with being able to interview for jobs, making sure that our members are taken care of, but also things like taking our language culture out for education, being able to make sure that the people that grow up on the reservations and then grow up in tribal Indian land are able to learn those languages and learn that culture. And that way they can keep that with them. They can continue to learn about their culture and then pass that along to their generation, the next generation.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions, everyone. They're pouring in. So we have another one. Shariah Lane asks, we've heard a lot about limited capacity within tribal communities. What kind of work is being done to train tribal members to have the capacity to manage networks in the long term? Who would like to take Shariah's question?
I'll take that. Oh, Mike.
Okay, Rob first.
I'll
go ahead,
start,
Robin.
Mike, and then you can go. So, within what I've seen is a lot of support coming through for fiber technician training, management technician training, as well as other jobs that are in the telecommunications industry. And I've been in the industry for 30 years. So I know that if somebody starts when they're young, they can build a lifestyle for their family that they might not otherwise be able to do so in a rural community. And I think that's really important. And we've been very fortunate where we're at. And I hear this story across the US that many organizations have put together programs. FBA has one, Optic Path. There's also one locally in Oklahoma, OSUIT, and there's other programs that they will come to the location, whether it's a tribal nation or a VOTEC or some type of training facility, and they will put classes together for a low cost. Now, what we did is in our application, we put together funds for X number of people to go through the training classes once we started implementing the grant and the build out. And I think many tribal nations have done that as well. So that makes it easy to help support the vendors that come into those areas and then provide that training.
Great,
Mike.
Thank you. Mike, go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to add, at Saddleback, actually create, where do people find telecommunications? Rob just said, here's some vocational type training. I got mine in the United States Air Force a long time ago. And as I thought of young people at Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, I looked around and the demographics of the company were not tribal members. It was 90% non-native and other tribal members, but no, we had 2 tribal members in our environment. So we started an apprentice program. I said, if we get somebody that is eager to learn, we can actually train them. And then over time, this should transition from non-natives operating this to the tribal members, actually. So we did hire tribal members, and we trained them. It took about a year to 2 years to get people trained, mostly about their passion, their initiative to get that going. Same with the Southern Ute. In our operating agreement that we have with them to operate the network, we're to provide training. And so that's what we'll do over our 5-year contract is we will train individuals. And we have one individual. We thought it would take 2 years. He actually completed the apprenticeship. He's a full field technician, fiber technician now in 1 year's time. So it can be done that way also. But I like the information Rob gave, but other ways to think about it.
Okay. I've got questions too, but we're getting some good questions. Let's just keep going on them. This one from Marty Pretends Eagle asks, with BEAD, okay, and obviously, again, remember, we got our event tomorrow on Speeding BEAD Summit, but this is an important point. Let me read the question first. With BEAD, does each state continue to call each tribe a high-cost area? And again, let me just kind of preface this by saying, obviously, there are certain broadband programs for tribes exclusively, right? And those still exist. Maybe it'd be useful if one of you, Rob, if you'd care to talk just a bit about the specific tribal broadband programs. But BEAD, of course, is a program that tribes and non-tribes can both apply to. And Marty's specific question is, does each state continue to call a tribe a high-cost area? Now, I don't know if we've got the latest word on that, but let's just kind of pose that two-part question about the tribal broadband and the role of tribes within BEAD. And I'm going to turn to you, Rob. Again, maybe you may not know, but just give you a chance to comment on this, and anyone else too.
So what I found is that with all the different NOFOs, the states have, customized their NOFOs that they send out and added their flavors so that it could, meet the needs of the state. So for state of Oklahoma, there is a high cost per passing, and in the very initial rollout, there was a dollar amount that was set for each state at high cost per passing. Now, I think that will completely go away, because once we reevaluate with the technology availability within the state, then that will probably change the selection of carriers and vendors that might have access to the BEAD funds. And I say that in the sense of, if it's going to be based on cost versus competitiveness and cost, then that changes the game. So I think the goal, if you're a carrier and I'll speak to our state of Oklahoma, that you need to really watch what your cost per passing is going to be in comparison to your previous application. If you had an application that had a high cost per passing, and we had a mark that we were trying to hit that made sense on a previous application, not BEAD, but we think we'll need to lower that to be more competitive if we file an application. But I think that everybody has to keep that in mind, that I think that the funds are going to be spread out over the different technologies. The goal of the state of Oklahoma has always been to cover 100% of the area. Now, that's a pretty difficult task, and it always was with the fiber preference. If you even add the other technologies, it will still be a very difficult task. Now, the question will be, how are the funds spent? What the concern is that there are a lot of metro areas in the bigger cities in Oklahoma, and I'm sure it's like this in other states too, where the edge of those metropolitan areas could, fit into that higher cost for passing. And, maybe those are just regional ROI TCO build outs for existing carriers, but they haven't been executing that over the last couple of years because they're anticipating they're going to get BEAD funds. Well, the BEAD funds could come back and be utilized for that when, in fact, that there are existing networks close by, versus when you go into rural areas, there is no network. So some of that has to be middle mile to build out to the areas. So it's a balance. You have to pay a lot of attention to what's going on. At the state level, you have to ask a lot of questions. We typically have monthly meetings here, and you just have to be engaged at all times.
Who else would like to address the question of the bead areas for tribal locations. Let's build a little bit more on technologies. Anonymous attendee asks, the challenging terrain for build out has been mentioned. And is fixed wireless access a viable option? And you know, I guess, and we might have had a conversation about this, Rob, previously, right? There's a lot of people who, in my experience, okay, maybe I'm coming at a little bit narrow lens, think about tribal broadband and wireless. And so it's kind of good to see there's really lots of technologies deployed. But what about the pluses and minuses of fiber, of fixed wireless? Satellite's also been mentioned, right? How does a tribal nation view the technology choices that are available when they're working on projects? You know, I don't know, Rob, Keith. I also interested in Isaac and Mike's thoughts on this as you work with the is it the Southern Ute tribe that you've worked with?
Yes. And again, you know, fiber first is what the tribe wants. However, when you hit the terrain, like anonymous attendee was talking about, the cost to get through cobble and rock and stuff skyrockets. And in western Colorado, it's pretty rocky. So if you got the funding to support X number of households, and now you've chewed up a lot of that because of the terrain, what do? Are there gaps that you have that fixed wireless is a good solution? We think so, particularly if they're fiber fed. If the base stations are fiber fed, you can get some pretty good speeds depending on distance and the remote nodes and whatever system you want to use to fill gaps is the way I look at it. But for long term, I mean, a fiber solution, you change out the electronics, the optronics and stuff, and you increase speeds and stuff. Wireless is gonna, just like copper, right? It has resistance, it has electrical features that speeds start to get hampered because of all kinds of things. Fixed wireless has its place. I think it's a good gap for areas you can't reach to get at least maybe 100 by 20 to subscribers because you can't reach them with fiber because the cost is too much from wherever your backbone is. So,
thank you, Keith.
Yeah.
I'll jump in on that as well, Drew, if it's okay.
Please do. Yes.
Yeah, no, certainly, I certainly support what Mike is saying, and we often start to make these high cost construction decisions without going down the path a bit more of innovative construction technologies. So there are technologies coming to the market, namely narrow slotted cutting wheels that effectively have a very narrow profile within rock, and from a they're certainly not as cheap as plowing in black topsoil, but may, from a total cost of ownership perspective, once you think about a 20, 30, 40-year life of fiber versus wireless, where you're going to be changing technology or upgrading technology every 5 years, from a total cost of ownership perspective, they start to neutralize some of the perceived high cost of building in very rugged terrain. So there's often a combination here of both advancing construction technology, doing field trials with trusted contractors to try and drive those costs down before you make the decision that it's unaffordable. You don't necessarily need to dig a foot wide trench through solid rock to install fiber these days.
Great. Rob, would you care to add anything to this question of technology choice?
Yes. So I think one of the things, and Keith said it really well. Do you want to spend the money today, or do you want to spend it 5 years from now? You can spend less now if you're going to spend it 5 years from now. And this has always been technology, right? If you have the access methodology of copper, you have the limitation of what you can put over that copper, and it's then limited by the equipment you put at the end of that copper. Well, now with fiber, you have almost unlimited bandwidth. You can put multiple terabytes on the existing fiber networks. It's only limited by the equipment. So we know that the scalability of fiber far out advances what wireless technology can do. Now I see that wireless technology is starting to move faster and get better, and the amount of bandwidth continues to scale, but it really all comes down to the carrier and how they provision the network, because the larger carriers have been providing wireless services for a long time now. But what's not known is that many of these wireless carriers had very low bandwidth going to these towers. In some cases, they would only have 10 or 20 meg of even over fiber connectivity going to the tower. So that's supporting that area of cell phones. So then you come back to what's the application that you're going to need to connect to it. Now, we know that if you give slower speeds and only certain applications can be run over those slower speeds, that's the application that you get. If you have faster speeds and more capability, then you start to get better applications over that. And so the gap starts to widen. When we talk about the digital divide, that's where it starts to widen, because people that live in tier 1 cities with access to fiber, when quantum computing starts to kick in, they will have access to applications 2, 3, 5, 8 years from now that if you're in rural America, you just won't have access to. You won't be able to utilize those type of applications. And I think that's where the conversation changes. If we wanted to invest the money, whether it's through funding or through corporation investment, then rural areas can get subsidized to have fiber built out. Now, as population grows in those rural areas, they will become more attractive for higher speeds connectivity out to those rural areas. So whether it happens now or in the future, it will likely happen, because the people that build those applications will want access to those populations.
So building on, I'll get to you, Mike, but Shariah adds another point to this conversation, Shariah Lane, and Shariah mentions Terra or Tara as a new hardware tribes can add to their toolkit. It transmits connectivity using light beams to connect fiber outlets. I don't know anything about this. I'm just mentioning it because of the question. Is this something that you all have heard of, or is anything else to kind of say on this point? If not, that's okay. Mike, I know you wanted to add something, so go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to add to Rob's comment, because he's spot on. There wasn't a real need for fiber, because applications that are being developed are developed based on the capability of networks out there. But with fiber now, we're going to see more and more applications come out that are going to be hungry for that bandwidth, to Rob's point. So as that grows and that capacity opens up like that, more and more software gets developed, it starts to fill that up. So if you're in a fixed wireless, or you're even with satellite, you've got latency issues with satellite, you're going to be constrained, and that is going to push rural America and Indian country further behind if they don't have fiber. I agree 100% with Rob's comments.
I'll chime in on that. I often say that latency is the new currency. Everyone has been quite focused on speed and down raw bandwidth capability, but applications, and especially AI in the future, are going to be driven off of very low latency applications to give a user I'll say a real-time immersive experience that everyone is looking for.
So
Can I
Marty,
chime in as well?
Oh, please, Isaac, of course, go ahead.
No, it's basically been said already, but I think this is something I often see when I work with any type of communities, that they easily fall into the same sort of wheel tracks as a for-profit company. If you think about it, and I think with our background, where in open access, again, you look at the infrastructure, the fiber as infrastructure. It's an infrastructure asset, and then you're gonna use that for multiple purposes for a long period of time. It's more easy to take a step back and not look at yourself as a for-profit provider, and then it makes more sense to invest for the long term. And so I think that is sort of a recommendation. If you're building for the community, using grants or whatever funding source you have, it doesn't really matter. But don't look at this for in 5 years and making a profit in those 5 years. That's not the purpose. That's not why you're building it. Like more people here said, great connectivity, being able to use these new apps, learn them, that will bring the value to the community, with people getting better paid jobs, building companies, and that will make more money flow into the community long term. You're not making your profits on those internet services sold. And that is why I think Mike is right. There is, fixed wireless is great nowadays. It's not a bad technology, but it's not fiber. There will be more maintenance. You will need to replace it. There will be more truck rolls. That's just how it is. That it has a place, but I think you should have the community hands on and the community benefit and impact, and try your very best to build an infrastructure that would last into the future.
Your mentioning of open access in the tribal context, Isaac, makes me want to just ask one more question about this project for you and Mike. And this, I think you believe you were featured in the film that was released at Fiber Connect. Not you personally, but the project was featured. How did it come about that the Southern Ute tribe, I believe, and correct me if the name I'm missing.
You're correct.
Did they come to the conclusion that they wanted an open access network? Like, just briefly, what was the sort of delineation? Because we're talking about the tribes choosing different technologies. What led to that decision?
I think that what really led to it, Drew, was the fact that they wanted competition. They didn't want a single provider in there that could dictate pricing on their network, right? Because it's their tribal members that are going to get the services, but they're not buying it from Southern Ute directly. They're buying it through an internet service provider. If you have multiple internet service providers, like I said early on, they can price it the way they want. The tribe sells them at a wholesale rate what the bandwidth would be, what the cost is. They then can mark it up at whatever way they want to. They can add voice services if they want to. The services that lay on that, the tribe's responsible for layer 2, and the ISPs are at service level 3. So they wanted competition, and we've seen subscribers move from one ISP to another ISP. Already in this new network, we've seen people move from one to the other, and it gives them flexibility. Yeah.
We've got a great question from Marty Pretenzigel. Another question. How important is having a fiber network along with a data center within tribal boundaries? And this kind of raises kind of big tech. I mean, like, there's a lot of attention now on data centers, much more so than 2 years ago, in part because AI's development, right? But data centers are key to the infrastructure. And I see Keith is raising his hand, so go ahead and chime in on this, but also just the nuts and bolts of how a tribe interconnects with a big tech hyperscaler or a multi-tenant data center. Go ahead, Keith.
Sure. I'll jump in on that. Thank you. It's a question that we get a lot in terms of strategy, and with a lot of, I'll say, attention and speculative money going into data center development now. There are really 3 things that drive data centers. One of them is fiber, high speed, low latency connectivity. The second is available land and community support for building such a structure. Not everyone wants to live beside something that looks like an Amazon distribution center. But the third one that is important is the availability of low cost and ideally renewable energy to power the data center. The profitability of the data center is driven by the energy input costs long term. And we often see communities looking at bundling projects that include broadband, green energy, including small module nuclear, if that's a vision. But the energy development and energy sustainability is also a dimension that fuels the data center. So the data center locally on tribal land can be a gateway to quote big tech interconnects, but regardless of there being a data center or not, a data center allows you to physically, control the location of data, especially sensitive data and where that is stored. But it is important for the tribe to have a data sovereignty policy and direction. If a data center is in the cards economically and those three factors come together, then I think it is an important investment, and it is another dimension to creating both local jobs but technology-driven infrastructure that the tribe will own and operate long term.
Fabulous. We're gonna take two more questions here, and then we'll give each of you a chance to offer closing thoughts. Nicholas Pardlowski says, as a Squamish Nation elder here in Vancouver, Canada, how developed are the more than 150 tribes in British Columbia in their interconnections? I don't know. Does anyone have experience, Keith? Have you
Sure.
worked?
I'll as the Canadian on the panel, I'll take that one, and thanks, Nicholas. Certainly, the BC provincial government, along with our federal government here, has been very focused on advancing Indigenous connectivity in the province, and there are 150 tribes. Some of them are very, what I'll call, high capacity, well funded, and very capable. Many are not, and part of the effort is creating a broader umbrella to bring these tribes in under a larger project. The CRTC, our federal regulator here in Canada, is launching an Indigenous stream that will enable both capacity building, investment in transport infrastructure to connect local networks. And I'll tease it a bit and say there's more to come, and certainly happy to speak with Nicholas outside of the panel and talk to some of our thoughts as Arcadis on an ambitious project we're working on with both levels of government.
We have an interesting question about, are there any Native American foreign trade zones set up that might be exempt from the current tariff mess and make sourcing costs more predictable? I don't know if that's too far out, but does anyone have any thoughts on trade with Native American trade zones?
Well, at the risk of getting myself into trouble, there are some nations that straddle the border. And I'll say I don't have any particular information on that, but I'll go back to the days of alcohol prohibition and how alcohol used to cross the border. And perhaps there's something to consider there in terms of those nations that have land on both sides of the border.
Let's give each of our panelists an opportunity to offer any closing thoughts. We haven't really even gotten to some of the questions I teed up, but like any successes that are notable, that stand out, that need further attention as great examples, or any big lingering challenges that, obviously many, but like any successes or things to look for in the future. Rob, we'll go in the same order we start in. Rob, close us out with your thoughts.
Thank you, Drew. So I think one thing that has gotten better is the awareness of what's going on in tribal communities all across the U.S. and everywhere else. So, there's a lot of success stories out there. There are tribal nations that have acquired ILECs, CLECs, have organically grown. And I mean, there are many here: Sac and Fox out of Oklahoma City, out of Oklahoma, Chickasaw Nation, Trace Fiber Networks, Choctaw, Mohawk up in the Northeast, Colville tribes in Washington, Cheyenne River up north, and Navajo Nation. So, there's other stories of tribal ISPs that have been very successful. I think what we will see is that these tribal internet service providers will start to become more competitive in their regions, and you'll just see them get better and better. Yakoki, thank you.
Here. TISPs, for Tribal Internet Service Providers.
Okay.
Awesome. Isaac.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my initial thought there. I mean, we are starting to see open access networks being built. I think it really makes sense because you can stay in control of the ownership and basically dictate the rules. For example, if you want the local staff to be trained, that is a requirement you can put on any operator or ISP coming in, but you don't need to build all that competency from the beginning. And then with these TISPs that I agree with Rob will definitely grow and become more successful. Imagine how they could grow and bring, benefit to their communities if they could be on these open access networks. And I mean, they're not only, on tribal lands, it's sort of a new thing, but there are many open access networks. Why not set up an ISP ready to go on open access networks and just expand otherwise? I like the TISPs. I would buy from a TISP. That would be awesome.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for being with us, Isaac. Mike, closing thoughts from you.
I think tribes should really be focused on after the bill. What do we do now? How do we make sure that we can support this going forward? Whether part of it is the education of our people, to get them trained, to have them operate, or get somebody in for an interim with a clear plan on how to migrate. Don't forget about all the maintenance costs. We talked about fixed wireless, that you have to replace equipment. You have the same thing in a fiber network. Equipment needs upgrades. You pay support fees that typically are around 20% of the cost, retail cost of the equipment from the likes of the Nokias of the world. So don't forget those, because that becomes a cost that continues on forever. And so anyhow, that's what I would make sure that the tribes think about.
Awesome. Keith, closing words.
Thank you. No, it was great to be here. I'll put in my vote for the TISP acronym. I love it. I think that's really going to catch on. My overall message here is these projects have to be built in partnership with the community, not any other way, and with the long-term goals of the tribal community, as stewards of the natural resources, that the land, the water, and the people sustainably. So in ensuring that knowledge and skills are transferred and that community champions emerge, and a economically sustainable network and infrastructure is put in place. So really, my compliments to the panel. Great discussion, and back to you, Drew.
Well, and that will have to be our last word. Again, don't miss tomorrow, the Speeding Beat Summit. It begins at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. The live stream will start that time, but the program will really kick off at 9, just for those of our friends in the West Coast and Alaska and Hawaii, right? Just be aware of that. And it's $55 unless you're already a Breakfast Club member, in which case, no charge. Breakfast Club members just go to the Speeding Beat Summit page and go to the bottom and sign up for the access to the webinar. On behalf of our great panel here, we'll see you tomorrow.